Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edward Nguyen. Today is Wednesday, September 9th, 2020. Today we'll be looking at the reserve list. Again, this comes up a lot. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of discussion to be had. This is more or less a continuation from from the topics we had yesterday, just to look at some more data, look at some more points, bring up some other opinions that people have on this, and just kind of flesh out some of the thoughts that we started with yesterday, and just to develop perhaps our own opinion on it, and then just get a better idea of where people are coming from. Beverage of choice today: black coffee. Nothing too interesting. No creamer like usual. So let's get right in. So one of the things we touched on yesterday is we know that the reserve list exists in the reason the reserve list exists is because there is a very limited number of these cards. A lot of these cards are on the reserve list are meant to be collectible. The goal is to preserve their value. In the early years of Magic's history, one of the things that they had done was Wizards actually publicly published the info regarding print run size and quantities of cards. It does require a little bit digging to do, but if you look at Crystal Keep, this is a very old website, as you can tell by the look of it. Crystal Keep and Magic Libraries, they both contain information on this. This is them compiling information that is publicly available from Wizards. These numbers that they do have are confirmed by Wizards regarding the size of print run and roughly the breakdown of how many cards are out there. So if we look a little bit closer at this, we see that, let's see, the one on Crystal Keep is a little bit better. There's a disclaimer. There is a point when they stop publishing numbers, and the number is speculation. It becomes very, very hard at one point when the game becomes large enough to really pinpoint exactly how many cards are being printed. Again, all speculation. We all have anecdotal stories. We know, you can say, one way we can look at sets right now, for example, is if you look at an average WPN store, most owners would probably be willing to tell you how much product they open. We know how many WPN stores are registered on the WPN finder. On Wizards, if you in theory, you could multiply the number of boxes the store opens times the number of WPN stores there are out there. You get a rough number of how many boxes, but obviously your small mom pop shop probably doesn't open on the same volume that some of the mega stores that have to open up a large amount of product do. But that's a reasonable place to start. If you really want to dig in, a lot of people are really into the math behind that. But again, all speculation. So if we start off with Alpha, we see Alpha print run 2.6 million cards, 50% of which are starters, 50% of which are boosters. And then it goes down, it gives a breakdown of rarity. Between Alpha, there are 1,100 of each Alpha rare, 4,500 of each Alpha uncommon, 16,000 of each Alpha common, and 85,500 of each Alpha land per picture. 1,100 Alpha rares is really not that many. If you think about it in the grand scheme of things, 2.6 million cards is a very, very tiny print run. If we have a booster pack, if the entire print run was via booster pack, 2.6 million cards. I don't have a calculator here. 2.6 million cards. Divide this by 15 cards per booster. That's 173,333 packs. If we assume 36 packs per box, which is different than what it was back for Alpha, I believe, that's only 4,800 booster boxes. That's really not a lot of product in the grand scheme of things. 1,100 of a single rare is not that much. If we think about 1,100 rares in terms of sheer scale, that's roughly something that can fit inside a one-row box. One-row box, probably about this many cards. Every single Alpha Black Lotus in the world would fit inside a box this big. And that's discounting the fact that there are probably some number that have been lost to time. There are reports from Gen Con in 1993 when Magic the Gathering was first introduced. When they gave away starter packs, booster packs, people would play it, and there's definitely reports of people just throwing away these cards once they were done. So some amount has been lost to attrition. There's no doubt some very, very small amount of sealed product out there. If you're really in the market for it, you can go out and look. There are some people that are holding on to them. Occasionally we do see box breaks, packs breaks, that people open them and sell off the cards inside. Each time that happens, obviously some sealed product is getting lost. They become increasingly rare. Trying to find cards in good condition is very rare. So we're looking at 1,100 copies. We've lost some amount to people just getting rid of them, throwing them away. Some amount is locked away in sealed product. There's probably some number of cards that will largely be lost in the sense that they may be buried in an attic somewhere. Someone who was in their early 20s in 2000 or in 1993 when the game came out, if they had picked up alpha product back then and were playing back then, right? That's 27 years ago. In their early 20s, they'd be in their middle ages, probably pushing 50 at this point. It's very well possible that they may have their cards buried away in their house, in an attic, in some place that's really not going to be accessible until either they pass away, they have some reason to go through the attic and try and dig up these old cards. So 1,100 copies of these rares, it wouldn't surprise me realistically if we look at 20% attrition rate, that's under 900 copies of each left out there. And of those 900, a lot of them are probably in binders in game stores. The higher end alpha cards, a lot of people like to pimp out their vintage decks, pimp out their old school decks, get alpha power, alpha dual lands. So a lot of it's out there, but in terms of good investable copies of these cards, they're getting really, really hard to find. Especially with some of the more iconic pieces being collectible. If you look at Alpha Shivan Dragon, it's probably one of the most iconic cards in Magic. It has virtually no value by today's standards. We actually see this card being printed multiple times over the years. One of the cornerstone arguments for removing the reserve list is that these older cards, the original print runs, the alpha, beta, unlimited print runs, because the print runs, themselves are so small, even these cards existing today, and people frequently point to Shivan Dragon. If you look at a recent video that was done by the professor, Tulare Community College, he recently had a piece on the reserve list. He mentions Shivan Dragon, he mentions Birds of Paradise. These are both cards that Shivan Dragon, largely unplayable. Birds of Paradise, pretty powerful card, fairly not as powerful as it was back then, obviously, but both these cards, they were in the original printings of Magic, Alpha, Beta, Unlimited. They both have many, many printings over the years. And both those cards, Birds of Paradise, down to $6 to $8 on most markets. Shivan Dragon, largely bulk rare. That card is entirely unplayable in today's game. The Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, the original ones hold value because of the very iconic art. And again, small print run. In this video, the professor, he says that the original versions will retain their value. If, again, we look at these cards, there's a full price range. Shivan Dragon, it's virtually bulk for the more recent printings, all the way up to thousands of dollars for the alpha variants. If we look at some other cards as well, dual lands, there's a pretty large spread for dual lands. There's the high end of the spectrum where people are wanting to pimp out their decks. Alpha dual lands, several $1,000s a piece. Look at revised dual lands, several $100s. Underground Sea, Volcanic Island, usually topping out probably around $600 right now, give or take, depending on condition. So there's a pretty wide spread. The revised versions of these cards appeal to the people who are wanting to play with the duels. That's where most of your legacy player base will own revised duels. people that have been in the game for longer, are legacy, vintage, old school diehards, they're more likely to be the ones that are upgrading into beta duels, alpha duels, etc. Coming back to our argument here, we look at alpha, small print run, 2.6 million cards, beta, 7.8 million cards. This is 3 times the size of alpha, right? So we have 1,100 rares of alpha, so we have 3,300 rares for beta. But we go past that. Unlimited, pretty big difference. We go from 7.8 million beta cards to 40 million unlimited cards. Roughly 18,500 of each beta card, or of each unlimited card, excuse me. So for every one alpha Lotus, there is roughly 1 point, let's see, 10 times would be 11,000. So it's so there's roughly 15 unlimited Black Lotuses for every one alpha Black Lotus out there. And if you think about that scale, that's a pretty large increase, but that large increase is still dwarfed by today's sheer print runs in terms of how much product is available out there. And then we go beyond that, revised. They've obviously changed that at this point, but now we're at 289,000 of each revised rare. There are a total of 600 million revised cards. This is a 15 times increase from revised. This is when the game has gotten much larger, much more popular, but we really start to see the scale of this, the magnitude of how rare some of these cards are and how few of them are really out there. If we look at the early expansions, Arabian Nights, the first expansion in 1994, 5 million cards. Antiquity's second expansion, 15 million cards. This is double the size of beta at this point. Legends is when it starts to really branch out. There's 35 million cards, roughly on par with Unlimited. Legends, we still see plenty of rares that are quite expensive. Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, most notably leading a pack. But there are still quite a few cards out there in Legends that have a sentimental value. Many of them are on the reserve list for that reason. We go down Legends rares, 19,500. There's more Legends rares than unlimited rares. This whole article, it's pretty interesting to read. It just really gives you a scope of how rare some cards are, and what print runs really looked like back then. This article on Magic Libraries, there is some speculation. I imagine some rough napkin math says that there's 500 million Ice Age cards, 400 million Mirage cards, 400 million Tempest cards, etc. Collector's Edition, International Collector's Edition, CE, IE, 10,000 and 5,000 respective sets. Those have gained some popularity over the years. For anyone who's not familiar with them, these are cards. These are the original iteration of the World's Championship cards. They look like beta cards, except they have square corners, the uncut cards. So they're completely square. It's very easy to ding them up as a result, because the squares are very easy to get damaged. And if you pull them out of the sleeve, they actually are gold bordered on the back, and they do say Collector's Edition or International Edition on the back. Let's see here. Let me actually switch to a screen capture. Let's move this up so people can see. So for everyone who wants to see this, Crystal Keep, this is the URL, mtg.icequake.net/www.crystalkeep.com/magic/misc/rarity-info.php. If you just Google this will come up. This similar to the page on magiclibraries.net. This used to be a much more popular forum page for people who collected libraries and oddities. Most of these posts are pretty old. This post was dated in 2008. And then this one says it was last updated in late January 1996. So that really puts into scale how rare some of these cards are compared to today. There's certainly a reason why people would want to have their investments protected, especially if they contain a large size of them. Without really pointing names, there's stores that have fairly deep inventory. They do contain a disproportionate amount of these cards. It's been a prime target for investors and speculators who hold deep copies of reserve list cards, operating on the assumption that without the reserve list being broken, these cards will naturally go up over time as the game gets older, as more people have interest in the game, as more people are coming into the game, and as cards will just naturally attrition away over time. These cards will naturally disappear for whatever reason, and their cards will slowly go up. And for the most part, they're not wrong. If you look at the price trend for reserve lists across the board, if you discount roughly 50% of the reserve list, which are cards that are largely bulk, no one really cares about them in terms of power level, and we only look at the higher echelon of cards that are desirable, that are playable, the Legends rares, iconic rares from Arabian Nights, Bazaar of Baghdad, Mishra's Workshops, Tabernacle, Power, Duels, etc. Most of these cards have seen a steady increase across the board. There have been some noticeable times where we've seen large spikes due to their price increases when people are suddenly trying to move into the market. But across the board, reserve list cards have done very well. If you actually compare the reserve lists, if you have a reserve list portfolio, if you had a hypothetical portfolio that contained one of each reserve list card, it would actually outperform the S&P 500. Since you can look back, one of the most common mantras in investing in the stock market, investing in your 401k, whatever portfolio you choose to, is that it's better. You'll make more the longer you are in the market. That's how investments work. That's how growth works. The longer you are in the market, the larger your portfolio will become. And being in the market for longer will outweigh putting more into the market. If you're buying in right now, even if you're spending a lot of money to buy in, trying to get in on these reserve list cards, you're not going to do as well as someone who put in a little bit of money over a long period of time, but they've held on to their cards for a long period of time. Yesterday, when we were looking at some of these cards, there was a very, very long period of time when Wheel of Fortune, which had spiked quite substantially recently due to its play in EDH, you're acquiring it for 10%, if that, of what was now for a very long period of time. And anyone who was buying them at that time would have done very well for themselves. This can be said about Duels, this can be said about Power. Your growth is much more steady with those. You're unlikely to see large spikes. We aren't going to see an unlimited Black Lotus $5,000 to $7,000 on today's market, depending on condition, go to like $50,000. But it's reasonable to assume that the price on Black Lotus will continue to increase slowly over time unless there's something to be done about the reserve lists. So enough about the reserve list, enough about print runs. This data is all here. I would encourage people to look at it if they're really intrigued. It's really interesting to kind of see how Magic has grown over time as a result. But that data is there. So let's kind of shift away. I have this pulled up here. Let's look at modern Magic today as we know it. So the release date for Magic the Gathering Arena, this is their online platform, September 27th, 2018. It's approaching two years old at this point. There's been some talk on Twitter, on social media. People have kind of reflected on their experience with Arena, how it's changed Magic, what it's done to Magic. There was a lot of talk when it first came out. It was a very mixed bag. There was some fear from store owners that with Arena being free to play, it would actually detract from the physical in-person experience of playing Magic the Gathering. There was some fear that why would people need to come out and play Magic in person when you could easily play Magic at home, on your computer, in your pajamas, on Arena. So it's about 2 years old at this point. Yesterday I had discussed looking at the quarterly reports. If we pull up the first quarter of 2019, so this is April 23rd, 2019. Some noticeable excerpts here. Let's see. Our long-term investments in new platforms provided a meaningful contribution from our digital and esports initiative, Magic the Gathering Arena, as well as growth in Magic the Gathering tabletop revenues. This goes on to show that you can read more about it in here, but their digital platforms, them pushing Arena, is something that they focus very, very heavily on. Almost every single quarterly report within this, in the early stages, within the first year, do reflect how Magic the Gathering Arena is doing very specifically. That's something that they're trying to push very hard. There was some news that an executive from Microsoft made his transition over to Wizards of the Coast to work with them on their digital platform, to work with them on the marketing. Esports is something that Wizards has been trying very hard to tap into the market for. And this, if you read the reports in full, it's very clear that Arena is really going to be the future of Magic. That's something that they've pushed for. That's something that they're trying to hammer home. They want to make it clear that they want Arena to be as successful as possible. If we look at the report from earlier this year, February 11th, 2020, one of the lines here: we delivered growth in Magic the Gathering driven by the successful launch of Arena, and we executed at a high level during the holiday season. Full year 2019 entertainment, licensing, and digital segment net revenues increased 22% to $434.5 million compared to $356.3 million in 2018. Revenue growth was broad-based and fueled by the first full year of Magic the Gathering Arena, Hasbro's share of revenues from the Transformers Bumblebee platformer to date, customer products revenue growth, and higher digital gaming licensing revenues. Magic Arena is a big deal for them. That's really something that they're trying to push hard. That's really something that they are going to expand and will continue to expand, because that is the direction that they want to be taking Magic in the future. That's just the reality of it. The pandemic has largely accelerated this, I imagine, with in-store play being heavily restricted. We've seen more and more tournaments, more and more premier level tournaments being pushed to Arena Online. At the time of this recording, in September 2020, I believe the Mythic Invitational is happening right now. I see quite a bit of posts on my Twitter feed, people talking about the Mythic Invitational, what people are playing. Arena is a real deal. The reality is that it is here to stay. To further look at this, this is a blog post I have pulled up here. This is on Mark Rosewater's Tumbler. Mark Rosewater is the head of R&D for Magic the Gathering. He's been with Wizards for quite a long time. He's very active on social media. He writes a lot of posts discussing the development of Magic, the history of Magic, designing new sets. He's a very interesting person to read. There's a lot of his work out there. I believe he used a podcast about this as well. This was something that came up in May, earlier this year, May 26th to be exact, about 4 months ago at this point. Hey, Mark, I know that you probably won't answer this, but I really wanted you to pass this along if possible. Double Masters, while being a cool set, I'm assuming, is priced out of my range. While you don't control pricing, I just want you to know that $300 a box before gouging is really going to spoil a lot of the community's goodwill towards your company. I know that company line is, it's not for everyone, but Mr. Rosewater, it's a bridge too far for this 15-year invested player. I want to have, let's see. Oh, okay. So that's the question. So this is after Double Masters was spoiled. And this was when they had first announced, to put this in context, was this when they first announced that VIP product was going to be a thing. This is something new that they haven't done before. Double Masters was the first iteration of VIP. We have seen some of this premium product before. Collector's Booster was their first, the so-called toe in the water to experiment to see how it's done, with Throne of Eldraine being released last year in 2019. Throne of Eldraine was kind of their first experiment with collector boosters, with these premium packs that contain cards you could only find inside collector boosters. And now we're taking this one step further, and we have VIP boxes, which Double Masters, we've opened them, we've looked at them, right? Contains premium products. You can only get foil box toppers instead, VIP boosters. Most of them are retailing for probably, if I pulled up on TCG here, Double Masters VIP edition. Let's see. I pulled up here. There's 46 results. There's a few stores that have one. Some stores, the store has 11. We're looking about $103 minimum for this box. Most of them seem to, you can buy quite a few below $110, and then we have some stores that are beyond that. And the contents: 2 foil showcase rares or mythics, 2 foil rares or mythics, 8 foil uncommons, 9 foil commons, 12 full art basic lands, 2 which are foil. So $100 for this box. And then this gentleman here who tweeted, or who posted to Mark, he is more or less having some gripes about the product itself. There's fear that these products are slowly being priced in such a way that they aren't accessible to a lot of people. And below, Mark actually writes a fairly extensive rebuttal about this. Not so much rebuttal, I should say, but more or less a response, kind of his feelings. It's relatively short, so I'll read all of it, and then we can kind of break it down. Mark Rosewater, he writes, "I want to have an honest discussion with all of you. While making Magic the best game it can be is important to us, we are also a business. Part of our job as a business is to recognize all the various audiences and create products to serve them. That's how we make money, finding player desires and filling them with products. One of our audiences are invested players with a higher price threshold. That is, there are players who are willing to spend a lot of money for highly desired cards, be it reprints or alternate versions. It is in our interest to make products for those players, things like Double Masters and Collector Boosters. Note that we take great care to make those products something that group is happy to buy. The issue is those desirable cards are also desired by players who that product is not aimed for. Desirable cards are desirable cards. So when we make these products, that group gets upset because the prices seem so high. It feels like an insult. We made something that they'd like, but we priced them out of being able to purchase it. I get the ill will, but I also feel like not making products for that audience is unfair for both that audience and us. So I'm turning to all of you that feel upset. How can we make these products in a way that allow that audience to get what they want without all of you feeling like we're doing harm to you?" There's a lot to absorb here. I think the most important thing that people forget, whenever you see people griping about Magic the Gathering in some form or another, because people like to complain, one of the things that he addresses as a reminder to people is that Wizards of the Coast answers to Hasbro, and they are a business. They are in the business of making money. That is what they do. They have to do things that are profitable for that company. Otherwise, they would not do it. This is one of the most fundamental things of business. It doesn't take a genius to accept that if your business is losing money, you probably should be changing what your business is doing. Below that, he goes on to say, one of our audiences are invested players with a higher price threshold. They have done, I imagine, a lot of studies over the year. They know what the secondary market looks like. It's not something that they acknowledge, but they know that there are people out there who spend a lot of money on Magic. Every game store knows this. Every store owner knows this. There are some people that will buy a large amount of product every set release without question. Regardless of the quality, people are wanting the premium cards. There's always those collectors that want the high-end foils, that want the premium cards. We know that Masterpieces, in their previous iteration, when they were in booster packs, they did very well for Wizards. A lot of people liked them because they were an alternate high-end foil frame, but for people that wanted to simply play the card, you could still get cheaper variants, right? Not everyone needs to play that foil Soul Ring from Kaladesh as Expedition. There are other foil variants. There's From the Vault, there's Judge foils, and if all you care about is playing Soul Ring, you can buy it. It comes in every Commander Precon that you buy. Every Commander Precon since they've released Commander decks in 2011 contains a copy of Soul Ring, and you can buy that for as little as probably $5 or so on TCG Player. They know that there are people who want to be spending a lot of money on Magic cards, and Wizards is very, very smart to tap into this market. They know that there are people that want the premium cards, that like the alternate art versions, the foiled versions, the masterpiece versions, the borderless versions, etc. These versions that have a lot of appeal to people because they're cool, they're rare, they're pricey, and they look different. And by tapping into this, I imagine, is what led them to creating the collector boosters, and with the success of collector boosters, what would lead them to create VIP product. Even though, as a consumer and from the perspective of buying product, I do feel personally that it gets a little tiring. It does feel like premium product is becoming less of a premium. For those who don't remember, the early years of Magic, probably the first 6 years up through Urza's Legacy, there were no foil cards. No card was foil. Urza's Legacy had the introduction of a promo that was foil, and then Urza's Legacy, Urza Saga had some promotional foils, but it wasn't until Urza Saga that foils would start showing up in packs. And for the longest time, packs were the only way to get foils. There were premium cards that were given out at events, usually for promotional purposes, but these foils appeared at a very low rarity. I want to say there was one foil in 6 to 8 packs or so. You're probably only getting a small handful of foils per box. And of those foils that you're getting in your box, some number of those foils would be common or uncommon. That being said, if you go look at foils from that era, the multiplier from foils over non-foils is usually very large. If we look at some outliers, right? Brainstorm, Mercadian Mass. Brainstorm has several printings. It's been in Commander decks. It's a box topper in Double Masters. The original printing was in Ice Age. If you simply want a version to play, it's really not going to set you back that much. But a foil version of Brainstorm is several $100s. Because for a long time, that was the only way to get a foil Brainstorm. And that really set the difference for people who wanted to foil out their legacy decks, foil out their vintage decks, foil out their cubes, etc. Most of those cards in that era, because of how difficult foils were to get, have a very, very large price multiplier. Even for some of your commons, uncommons that are fringe playable, maybe in Commander, some of those foils have a pretty large price premium because of how rare they were to get. Eventually, when we get to Modern Masters, that was the first set. One of the things that they advertised that was supposed to be cool, cool edition, was that there would be one foil in every pack of Modern Masters in 2013. This has been something that they've introduced to every Masters pack since then. Every Masters pack does contain a copy of a foil card inside the pack. In addition, we've started to see foils for nearly everything. All F&M cards are foils. All League cards are foils. These cards that they give away as promotional product, almost everything is foil nowadays, just because, for whatever reason, that's how they decide to do it. Over time, the value on foils has slowly gone down. There are some instances where the foil is actually very similar in price to the non-foil, and there have been some extreme cases where the non-foil is actually worth more than the foil. Part of this may be that the nature of foils, depending on where you live, they'll naturally warp over time. Foils, if in the presence of humidity, will cause them to warp. I don't have an example of a warped foil on my desk, but when they warp over time, they become largely unplayable. If you only have a small handful of foils in your deck and the foils warp, you can very easily cut to them, which leads to problems when playing tournaments. That's why a lot of people, especially competitive players, don't like foils unless they can get their entire deck in foil. In addition, some sets, most notably Modern Masters 2015, the card stock was exceedingly poor. So foils, if you look at foils from that set, there is virtually no price difference between foils and non-foils. Prices are almost exactly the same, which really goes to show how little desire there is for foil cards. In my experience, selling cards online, usually if you post a copy of a foil card, a copy of a non-foil card, and they're priced similarly, I imagine, depending on the popularity of the card, you'll probably sell 20, 30, 50 copies of a card before you'll sell the foil one, just due to the difference in demand. So when we look at these foils, when we look at VIP packs, and going back to this blog post by Mark Rosewater, Wizards knows where their player base is. They know that they can get away with selling these premium packs because at the end of the day, people will buy them. If you just look at reports from across the board, most store owners repeat that VIP was something that they did very well with. It was very popular for them. Most places are largely sold out of VIP. They're pretty hard to get their hands on. A lot of people like them. There are some issues with the price. There is a pretty large spread in the product itself in terms of value you can open from the product. But it does seem like VIP was a success, a resounding success. Most stores are sold out of them. Most stores did very well with them who ordered from the beginning. And it just goes to show, and this further reinforces the point that Mark Rosewater is trying to make in his post here, is that these cards will do well, and desirable cards are desirable cards. This is a quote from his post. There is always going to be a divide between people that are unable to get these cards. People largely feel slighted when they're being left out. That's a lot of what drives the collectible market. That's a lot of what drives people buying and selling, is people want to be able to collect things. That's the nature of a collectible card game. And people feel slighted, as I mentioned, when people are unable to buy and have access to these cards. So we can provide feedback, we can discuss this, but the point being made here is that Wizards is a business. They have to be able to make decisions that are profitable for their business. Which brings us back to the reserve list itself. Personally, I'm of the opinion, and this is my opinion only, there will be a point in time when Wizards will choose to cash in on the reserve list. We see this being evidenced by the fact that they are aware of the secondary market. If you look at when they choose to reprint, they have to tap into reprint equity. Reprint equity is something we'll touch on in a moment, but they know that cards that they sell have to be desirable to people, and they can do this by enticing people with value. That's largely the purpose of master sets. Is masters sets are a way to get people to buy cards, to buy product, to be able to get the cards that have not been reprinted, and this gives them an opportunity to buy those cards and play with those cards. So I mentioned reprint equity. What is reprint equity? This is something that Michael spoke about when he was here on the interview with us on Monday, September 7th. If you want to go back, listen, I would suggest you listening to that interview. Reprint equity is the ability to reprint cards that have value. That's why cards get reprinted. It doesn't make sense to reprint cards that have no value. So here I have the page for Tarmogoyf. This is from MTG Stocks. This looks at data, pricing data for this card. If we look at 2013, $100 for Tarmogoyf. This is as far back as the chart goes. This is kind of with the introduction of Modern. 2013 in June was when Modern Masters was released. And we see this card is slowly climbing up over time. This was a time when only Future Sight Tarmogoyfs existed. There were no printings yet, and most of these modern reprints in master sets would not come for years to come. So here we're looking at $120. June rolls around. The price actually goes up in price despite the reprint. We're looking at $130 for Tarmogoyf. And then in early 2014, we're looking at $190, almost $200 for Tarmogoyf, with it spiking in March. March of 2015, over $200 a Tarmogoyf. Modern Masters 2 releases in late spring, roughly the same timeline. And then we see the price remain relatively stable, and then it slowly decreases over time. This price decrease, there's several reasons. By 2015, we have 3 printings of Tarmogoyf. We have the first Modern Masters, we have the second Modern Masters, and we have the Future Sight. By the time 2017 rolls around, we don't have a reprint. It is not in Modern Masters 3, but part of the decline in Tarmogoyf may be due to the fact that Tarmogoyf is not the premier creature that it was when Modern was first introduced. When Modern first came out in 2011, Jund was a very popular mid-range deck. Tarmogoyf was still the go-to creature as a 2-drop that was a very efficient beater. As time went on, and I lost my train of thought, excuse me. It fell by the wayside in terms of popularity. It did slowly fall out of favor. It was reprinted in Modern Masters 2017, excuse me. 2017, we have 4 printings, and then there's one final reprint for Tarmogoyf with Ultimate Masters in December 2018. So in a period of 5 years, from 2013 to 2018, we have gone from one printing that existed before Modern Masters to 5 total printings. 3 master sets, 3 Modern Master sets, 1 Ultimate Masters, and the original Future Sight printing. I would safely say at this point, Tarmogoyf is unlikely to be reprinted in the future, in at least the immediate future. We've seen it go down from its high. Part of it, again, probably less demand for Tarmogoyf nowadays. Jund will probably be an evergreen modern deck as long as it exists, but it's largely fallen out of favor. Some other cards, the printing of Fatal Push and Aether Revolt probably pushed down how much demand there was for the card. So the reprint equity, the demand for this card is going away. There's less reason for people to want to open Tarmogoyf. Is it still cool? Absolutely. It's kind of a marquee mythic. It's always going to be relatively expensive. If you open an Ultimate Masters, you're still making your money back on the cost of a pack if you open one. But the amount of people that are wanting to buy this has gone down over time. In 2013, if you're opening up a Tarmogoyf in your Modern Masters pack, that was a big deal because it was an expensive card. It was worth much, much more than the cost of a pack, and it was still in relatively high demand at the time. Now, it's kind of been exhausted. There's been a lot of options for people to buy Tarmogoyfs. Most people who want Tarmogoyfs probably already own Tarmogoyfs at this point, and the price isn't there. It's not quite as much. It's remained relatively steady. We see it more or less plateau to its today's price of about $60. If you actually look on TCG, it's a little bit lower than that, but the reprint equity for this card largely gone by the wayside. When we look at Fetchlands, that was one of the things that we had mentioned. If we pull up Scalding Tarn as an example, there are 5 total printings for Scalding Tarn. Zendikar, the first time Scalding Tarn was printed, the original printing was in 2007. In 2007. Since then, we've seen the first reprinting was actually the Zendikar Expedition. This was what came out in Battle for Zendikar 2016. This was the premium variant with the alternate art frame, the alternate art, very cool. This was actually the first reprint for this. Realistically, not that accessible for a lot of people, because if you don't want a foil version, well, you're still kind of stuck buying the original version from Zendikar. 2017 Modern Masters, that was the first printing for Scalding Tarn. This was the first way for people to actually get a non-full Scalding Tarn as an alternative to the Zendikar 1 itself. So it took 10 years, roughly 10 years from the original printing of Zendikar to Modern Masters for a reprint to happen. Since 2017, we actually haven't seen another Scalding Tarn until the Secret Lair dropped earlier this year. This was the ultimate Secret Lair. It came with one of each enemy Fetchlands. This was a Secret Lair drop that was only available to stores. It has one of each Fetchland inside. It was a fairly limited product. I wouldn't classify this as a true reprint. And then coming up in the Zendikar Rising set, we do see another variant on Expedition's Scalding Tarn. The difference this time is that it is available in non-foil and foil form. There are two ways to get this, as opposed to the first set of Expeditions that were only foil. These do come in non-foil box toppers that will be available. But since 2007, we've only seen 5 printings of this set, one of which, the Masterpiece, is only foil, one of which is a fairly limited product, the Secret Lair product, not largely available to most people. Most people probably won't see this unless they picked up from their store already. So we really only have 2 printings of Scalding Tarn with the upcoming box toppers. This is an example of a card that has high reprint equity. We see that the price is still pretty high. Original Scalding Tarns, cheapest ones will set you back about $55 or so. There's still a lot of reprint equity to be had in this card. This is something that Wizards knows is desirable. This is something that they know they will do well with, because any set that will contain Fetchlands will do well. Modern Masters 2017, that was a very, very popular set due to this is the first time that Fetchlands have been reprinted. There's a lot of reprint equity inside Fetchlands. That's something that they know that if they choose to reprint Fetchlands in a set, it will be popular. I suspect that Zendikar Rising will be popular because it has Fetchlands. The flip side of this is reprint equity is zero sum. When you reprint a card, it loses a small amount of reprint equity. In the case of Tarmogoyf, Modern Masters 2013, that was probably the highest. That was when Wizards knew to cash in on reprint equity. That was how they knew that Modern Masters would be a resounding success, because people wanted to open Tarmogoyf. Of course, there's other factors. Modern was booming. This was a way for them to reprint Modern staples. Modern Masters 2013 would probably have been a success regardless. But when they chose to cash in on that reprint equity, Tarmogoyf was the way to do it. Today, Fetchlands probably going to be the way they go if they want to cash in on reprint equity. But the problem is that's a cash cow that you can only go to so many times. We look at some cards. Tarmogoyf, I keep coming back to the example. This is probably the prime example. It really doesn't make sense for them to reprint Tarmogoyf at this point. It's been reprinted enough times that there probably isn't really enough demand for it to warrant taking a mythic slot inside a master set for them to warrant wanting them to continue to reprint it. If we take a look at Double Masters, I'll try and pull up, let's see here. Double Masters. Let's get this set. if we sort this by filter, rares, and mythics, we look at some of the best-selling cards. A lot of these cards are very popular. They've done well because part of the success of Double Masters is because there's a lot of desirable cards in there. A lot of these cards haven't seen reprints before, or it's been quite some time since they've seen reprints. We look at Exploration. This price is probably about half of where it was prior to the reprint. We pull up Exploration. One moment while my page loads here. Exploration, very popular commander card. It's popular in main green decks. That seems to be the go-to color for EDH. It's so playable in Legacy Lands deck. We look at the price history for Conspiracy. There was the point when this card was very, very cheap. 2014, 2015, right? $7, $8, creeps up to $12. This card really starts to pick up. You can kind of see where it starts to pick up in mid-2017. And prior to this year, right, even at the beginning of the pandemic, June, before we knew all this was going to be reprinted, we were looking at $40 for Exploration. And now, if we look at Double Masters, this card can be bought as little as $16. There's a seller here that has 35 copies at $15 plus 99-cent shipping. Much more affordable than where it was prior to this. And this is something that Wizards is aware of. I imagine one of their biggest challenges when designing master sets, designing these reprint sets, is choosing and picking what cards they can choose to reprint that will get people excited, right? If you open up a Tarmogoyf, if Tarmogoyf could be in Double Masters, you open it, you may not be as excited, probably because if you want Tarmogoyf, you probably already own your set of Tarmogoyfs. It's very realistic that you don't own Explorations yet. If you're trying to play Commander, this card is pretty expensive, and it's only been going up. And if you look at this trend, depending on when they decided to make this, right, if we assume roughly an 18-month turnaround period from them designing the set up until now, right, if this set was designed in early 2019, or even like as early as late 2019 going to 2020, you could see that the price has gone up enough for them to justify putting Exploration into Double Masters and people being excited to open it, because that's not something that people have been able to do for quite some time, right? Sword of Fire and Ice. This card has, I'm going to double check before I make a fool of myself here. Fire and Ice. 4 printings total. Sort by Magic the Gathering only. 4 printings total prior to Double Masters. The original variant, Darksteel, Modern Masters 2017, second printing. And then we have two versions. Judge promo, a pretty old Judge promo, fairly hard to come by. And then the Masterpiece version from Kaladesh, also fairly hard to come by. So prior to this, you're really only looking at Darksteel, Modern Masters. Last time Modern Masters was reprinted, was printed 2013. It's been 7 years at this point since you were able to open up a Sword of Fire and Ice in booster pack, realistically. So they know that this is something that by putting into Double Masters, it has a lot of reprint equity. It's something that is exciting to open. It's still fairly expensive. Right, we're looking at $35 for Sword of Fire and Ice. It's still not what I would consider a cheap Magic card by traditional standards. Cyclonic Rift. This is a card that is probably one of the best blue cards in Commander. It's kind of a blue win the game on the spot. This card hasn't really budged in price. It's gone down a little bit due to how many are available, but it's not really that much cheaper than it was prior to the reprint. And the last reprint that was available for this, we look at Cyclonic Rift. Three total printings. Most recent printing, Modern Masters 2017, 3 years ago at this point. Prior to that, it was Commander 2014, and then Return Ravnica in 2013. It's been quite some time since people have been able to open up Cyclonic Rift. Wizards knows that Commander is something that they do very well with. That's evidenced by them continuing to want to create Commander-centric product over the years. And they know that Cyclonic Rift, high reprint equity, this is something that people will be excited to open because it exceeds the value of the pack, and this is something that they have been able to do in a long time. So that's enough about reprint equity. Right? Why am I talking about reprint equity? Why is this relevant to discussion about the reserve list? Wizards knows, and again, this is the opinion that I came up with, that there is a lot of money for them to capitalize on to breaking the reserve list and reprinting these cards. It's very evident that assuming they decide the reserve list is going away, Zendikar Rising, there's going to be Box Topper dual lands, for example. That set, Zendikar Rising, would be the best-selling set in Magic's existence ever. People would go crazy, people would come out of the woodwork, because people would know, I can buy a booster pack, and I have the ability to open up a dual land. These cards are cards that have very, very high reprint equity. Power 9 has probably the highest reprint equity in the game, but they can't be reprinted because they're reserve list. So here we are. What is the solution to all this? I'm going to switch away from display here. What is the solution to this? This is where Wizards is between a rock and a hard place. They know that these cards have very high demand. People want to buy them. It'll do very well for them if they ever choose to reprint them. And I'm of the opinion that there is simply too much money to be made for them to not want to cash in on that reprint equity. I suspect that at some point in the future, there will be a decision, likely from the top, that we will get rid of the reserve list and free-for-all. Basically allow us to reprint these products. Not willy-nilly. It's unlikely that your draft boosters, your conventional boosters for Zendikar Rising, if they had chosen done it, would give you the opportunity to open up a dual land. They know that if they want to do this, they have to choose their battle carefully, right? Probably one of the best options would be doing it would have to be a higher end product. It would likely be collector boosters or VIP, and it would probably be a very, very small chance that in a VIP booster you could open up a dual land. In my mind, that's how they would execute it if they chose to reprint it. That would be a way for people to get very excited about the set, because the idea of opening up these is very cool. One of the best decisions they made for Battle for Zendikar was the introduction of the expeditions, because any person could go in, they could buy a booster pack, $4.99 or whatever it was, and they had a chance to open up a polluted Delta, a Scalding Tarn expedition. We're talking $300, $400 at the time when they first came out. That was exciting. That got a lot of people to open up a lot of product as a result. That's something that they know that they did well with. Battle for Zendikar was one of the best-selling sets at the time. In terms of how well they executed it, that was something that was very sweet, that was very exciting. At the time when I was in the game store, I know that that was something that Wizards did well to capitalize with. A lot of people, your most casual players, did well because, again, you can just buy one pack and you can hit big. And that's part of the excitement of opening up booster packs. There's the amount of money that's on the reserve list. It would be absolutely foolish of them to not break it at some point in the future when they know that, hey, we've had a slow year. We need to drop a set that's just going to wow people. People are going to look at it like, wow, this is awesome. I want to be buying this set. I want to be opening this set. I want to be playing with the cards in this set. And when that happens, the easiest way for them to do this is to break the reserve list and say that this is going to be a set in the future. you'll have the option to open up reserve list cards inside the set. This is going to be our first adventure into reprinting these cards. This is how we're going to do it. It's been a long time. The reserve list has been in existence for 24 years now. A lot of people are heavily vested. There's a lot of reasons why people would not want this. As mentioned in yesterday's episode, I'm largely indifferent about the reserve list. If it goes, it stays. I don't really care. If Wizards wants to continue to support Legacy, support EDH, making these cards accessible for people is how they're going to do it. Personally, like I said yesterday, I think if they are going to keep the reserve list, I don't know either way. If they're going to keep the reserve list, then Legacy, EDH, there needs to be something fundamentally changed about them. Wizards has slowly waned in its support of Legacy over time. I think this is smart. I think Legacy is I'm going to upset Legacy players out there, but I think Legacy is a poorly designed format. Legacy should go by the wayside simply due to the issue of card availability. If the reserve list becomes such a problem that Legacy is no longer viable to bring in new players, Wizards should not continue to focus on it. Again, why do we look at Arena at the beginning of the episode? Arena is going to be the way of the future. The reserve list doesn't exist on Arena. If they want to support it, great. They can do it on Arena. They can move the focus away from Legacy and move the focus away from people being upset about the reserve list. If EDH, for example, if the EDH committee were to come out and say tomorrow, every card on the reserve list is now banned in EDH. And for the record, if you look at the ban list on EDH, many cards that are prohibitively expensive are actually already banned. There is some issue with power level, obviously, but realistically, if people play Moxes in their EDH deck, is it really any more broken than Sol Ring? Probably not. The reason they're banned in EDH is because of how expensive they are, and they don't want to create these arms races where people feel like they have to be playing power to compete or some of these more expensive cards to compete. If the committee went out and said that every card on the reserve list is banned, I imagine a lot of money that is in the reserve list would start falling flat. If we exclude power, if we exclude some of the top cards in competitive vintage play, legacy play, old school play, a lot of these cards would kind of fall flat because a lot of what's driving up their value is largely due to EDH. Pound Cron, Replenish, these are cards from Urza Saga, Academy Rector. These are all cards that are on the reserve list. They're obviously the most recent ones, large supply on them. But these cards, their values are almost entirely propped up by being such powerhouses in Commander and EDH. With them falling by the wayside, do we really need to care about the reserve list? Like, again, as I mentioned, more than half the reserve lists, the cards are largely crap. Some of the Legends rares, right? Wall of Wood is kind of the or not Wall of Wood. Why can't I think of the name here? Deemed one of the worst cards in Magic. Wood Elemental, I think is that the name? Wood Elemental from Legends. Look at the card, it's terrible. This card is not really that expensive. The fact this card has any value at all is simply because of reserve lists, right? If these cards if people stopped caring, this card would probably have no value at all. And that's kind of where I stand on this. But I do want to be cautious about this. I do suggest that anyone who is out there do exercise some caution when investing in reserve list cards. It has been a tried and true strategy for a very long time. A lot of people have done very well simply buying reserve list cards and holding on to them. But personally, I do suspect there is a time in the future, there will be a time in the future when Wizards does make the decision to break the reserve list. For a long time, I thought the reserve list was safe. At this time, I do think it's relatively safe still. I would say it's a coin flip. But I would not be surprised if at any point in the future, Wizards did say that we're going to get rid of the reserve list and we're going to cash in on this. And that's where I exercise caution to people. Don't get caught up buying in this hype. A lot of the cards are probably more expensive right now than ever. If you do want to play, if you do want your Wheel of Fortune, your replenish for EDH, wait a little bit. Let these cards come down off of their high prices. They'll slowly cool off. They'll slowly stabilize. Will they still be expensive? Yes. Does it suck that you didn't buy them 6 months ago? Yes. But reevaluate if you really need them. Make sure you're buying them from reputable stores. Don't get scammed. And then make that decision for yourself if you really want to be owning these cards. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm a business. I have to make profitable decisions. It's more profitable for me to be buying these cards, selling these cards, buying more cards, selling more cards, than it is to hold on to these cards and wait for these large spikes to come in. Furthermore, I also insulate myself in the event of a reprint on some of these cards. In the event that the reserve list does go away, I am insulated from a large price shocks by not going too heavily in the reserve list. For any investor out there, you want to diversify your portfolio. You want to have a pretty wide spread of things. So going too deep on the reserve list may not be the best decision to begin with, in my opinion. So more can be said out there. There's still a lot of information. I would, again, recommend people to do their research, to look closely, to critically think about why they should be buying these things. If they are going to be buying these things, why they should not. Don't get caught up in FOMO, fear of missing out. There's always going to be another opportunity as an investor. You don't have to feel like you have to go out there and buy reserve list cards if you're looking to invest in them. You will find different opportunities to do so in the future. With that said, that does kind of wrap up where I stand on the reserve list right now. This has been 2 full days. I've talked about the reserve list for 2 hours. I'm sure I could go on, about the reserve list for another 20 hours. It is likely that the reserve list is something that we will revisit in a future episode. I will likely have people on to talk about the reserve list, some investors that probably have gone deep on the reserve list, to let them share their experiences, how they got in, etc. It will always be a hotly contested topic that a lot of people want to talk about. If you go on social media, you can read people's opinions, where people stand. Overwhelmingly, people do have a negative opinion of the reserve list, which is another pressure point for Wizards to get rid of it. But until then, we are left with the reserve list. This is the reality of the situation. This is the reality of the prices that we do expect to deal with. That's just the world we live in. That's what we have to deal with. And I would, again, encourage people to educate themselves, do research, and make the best possible decision that works for them. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Edwin13. You can find the social media pages for Vermilion on the right. Wherever you are in the world, I encourage you to stay safe out there, and